Hey friends, I'm Brie. Welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk to you about romantic comedies. So I'm going to recommend 6 rom-coms that I've read and really loved. But before getting into that, I just want to talk about rom-coms for a little bit. It's kind of a no-brainer that once I discovered my love of reading romance that I would find my way to romantic comedies. All throughout my life, rom-coms have been some of my absolute favorite movies. Some of the movies that I watch over and over again faithfully are rom-coms. So I'm really happy that once I found my love of reading romance, I gradually found my way to rom-coms because they are just kind of the perfect way to switch up my reading. I feel like there are some authors out there who really nail it. And now that I found my groove, I feel like there's certain things that I really look for. On the outside looking in, I assume that a lot of people would assume that writing rom-coms would be one of the easier types of romance to write, but I think it would be the most difficult. First and foremost, you have to be funny, and not everyone's funny. Even if you are funny, I think it would be difficult to get that translated on paper and like have the reader actually read it as funny. Everyone's comedy level is a little bit different. Writing romance is hard. Even just being a romance reader, every time I read a really good romance, I'm in awe at the magic romance authors can create because I have no idea how they're able to create these stories. I think people on the outside looking in are like, oh, it's very formulaic. Well, yes, we know that the characters are going to meet, they're going to lose each other, and then they're going to end up together by the end of the story. Looking at that also is just like really intimidating. Like, okay, we're going to follow this structure and put our own unique spin on it. Add in like the comedic aspect to that as well, and I just feel like it's probably one of the harder types of stories to write. So what I'm looking for, so we know the characters are going to meet, they're going to have their conflict that's going to break them up, and then we're going to see them together at the end of the book. I'm looking for uniqueness. I want to 100% believe that these two people belong together by the end of the book. I need to see them end up together. I also look for really good balance. I feel like some authors do a really good job of leaning into the romantic scenes, dialogue, and the character arcs. Some of the rom-coms that I have read that have been misses for me have been when I felt like the comedic aspect overshadowed the romance, or when I felt like it was too serious and I realized that I haven't laughed. I have to keep in mind like it is a romantic comedy. I feel like this is where the difficulty kind of comes in, is authors finding that way of like creating the perfect balance of both. I also look for over the topness. Now I know that this is one aspect of rom-coms that I think some people have an issue with, but as long as it creates a compelling story for me, I want all the overtopness that I can get, because for some reason with rom-coms I'm able to forgive that because a lot of times it just really adds to the comedic aspect of the story for me. I also like to see when, so a lot of times in rom-coms we see the protagonist, usually it's the heroine, and she completely like loses herself in the relationship. She's being completely swept away by love, and that is fine, but by the end of the book I really like to see her bring it back down to earth and remain true to herself. And some of my favorite romantic comedy films, this is one of the things that I really loved the most. One of my favorite rom-coms is He's Just Not That Into You, and that's what I loved about the heroine in that movie. In that movie, she does lose herself there for a little while, but she has that moment where she brings it back in and she's just like, you know what, I'm gonna be me, and it works. And that's when the hero's like, let me get myself together because this is a great girl. So I look for that in my romantic comedy novels as well. At the end of the day, I want to see the heroine stay true to herself and make it memorable. So I look back at some of my favorite rom-com movies. If you show me the cover of like American Pie, my mind immediately goes to a specific scene. Or if you talk about Sleepless in Seattle, my mind immediately goes to multiple scenes. So I look for that with my romantic comedy novels as well. If I'm scrolling through Goodreads and I look at a cover, I want to immediately be able to think of specific scenes in that book. Let's get into the actual recommendations. So first up we have Perky, and this is by Julia Kent. This is book 2 in a series. There is a novella and then there's book 1. Both of those were okay, and I was a little weary actually with continuing on with this series just because those first 2 were kind of okay. Book 1 was really funny, but then I just kind of got lost there for a little while, but book 2 was funny. So book 2 is Perky. It's Persephone's romance. In this romance, we learn early on in the book that she was in a relationship about 5 years ago, and the boyfriend, while they were in this relationship, she allowed him to take some compromising photos of her. That photo leaked to the internet, and now she's like this this really famous viral meme. It's hilarious. It's 5 years later and the characters from book 1 are getting married and Perky is in the wedding and they're doing like their wedding like pre-dinner, and in walks this ex of hers, and he is now a member of the US House of Representatives, and she is determined throughout this book to seek revenge on him. It was so funny, you guys. Julia Kent, I will say, she does a really wonderful job of writing hilarious dialogue. Like, that is what will keep you intrigued with this book, and I highly recommend listening to it on audio. I've listened to the first 3 on audio and they're just really fun to listen to, but where I feel like the first and second one were just kind of okay because they did lack a little bit of something. This one, the storyline kept me intrigued. I was really interested to see where the story was going to go because we know Perky has this idea made up in her mind about her ex. Like, he's the reason that my life has went the way that it has. But the more and more that she actually opens up to him, she starts to really question, like, did he do it or not? It dealt with something while also being funny, and I was also really intrigued in the romance because he's like totally smitten by her and she hates him because of what's happened. So there's just a lot going on, but it really keeps you interested and it was a lot of fun. So I really recommend it. I don't feel like you need to read the previous 2 books before reading this one. It feels like it can completely be read as a standalone. So next I have Sweet Little Lies, and this is by Jill Shalvis. This is book 1 in her Heartbreaker Bay series. I am slowly making my way through this series, and this follows Prue and Finn. What I really love about this book is, I will say, it deals with grief and guilt in a way that I've never read before. But aside from that, Jill Shalvis writes some of the most hilarious dialogue that I have ever read. She has like nailed it. I really enjoyed this one. I really like how she handled Prue in this book. Prue, her parents were responsible for this terrible car crash. Her way of like dealing with the loss of her parents and the guilt of like seeing how that crash affected other people. She's just found like kind of anonymous ways to insert herself into their lives, and her love interest in this one is one of those people that was affected by this car accident. There's a really strong friendship in these books that I really love, and it takes place in their own little corner of San Francisco. So while it is in the big city, it also feels like a really close-knit small town at the same time. It is hilarious, you guys. Like, all of the seriousness aside, this book was really funny. So if you're looking for like a new book to kind of see if you're interested in, to maybe like continue on with the series, I highly recommend this one. So next I have The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. This follows Carolina and Max is the brother of the groom who left Carolina at the altar. So it's years later and they find themselves having to work together, and not only are they working together, but they're competing for a job against her ex. This is just, it's really funny. I will say, like, I did have an issue with it, which I understand a lot of people are having the issue with it. It's just Carolina is super petty to Max. Like, she takes all of her anger that should have went towards her ex out on him. But in the midst of all of that, their banter back and forth and them like being petty towards each other because Max eventually gives in a couple of times, it's just really funny. So I definitely think it's worth the read. Just keep in mind, I'm not gonna recommend it and say like it's a perfect book. It took me a little while to get into because I was just like, she's being really petty. He's not the one who left her at the altar, but I still am really glad that I pushed through and continued reading it. It was really funny. So next I have Catastrophe Queen, and this is by Emma Hart. So Emma Hart is a romance author that I really want to read everything that she has written. I have read a few of her titles that have been misses, but Catastrophe Queen is one that just really stands out to me, and like I will recommend every time I get the opportunity to recommend a rom-com because it was just so good. It follows Mallory and Cameron, and I will say one thing about Emma Hart is, regardless of if I've read some and they've been misses, she writes really good meet cutes. Like, her meet cutes are some of my absolute favorites. So in this one, Mallory literally trips, is almost ran over, and drops some underwear, and like that's when she meets the hero. He gets out of the car like, oh my gosh, are you okay? We almost hit you. Then she goes to this job interview. She gets the job, and guess who is her boss? It is the hero that almost ran her over, Cameron. And this is their romance. And what's so funny about this book, like, yes, there's some really funny dialogue. Mallory's family is hilarious, but once you have been reading the book a little bit and you're like getting Mallory's like inner dialogue, it feels like the entire book you're bracing yourself, like hoping that she's a complete klutz. You're just like bracing yourself for the next time Mallory trips, or she spills coffee, or she drops papers all over the place. And it was just a really good time. So really recommend this one. It's not a long book. I think it was under 200 pages. So perfect for reading over the course of the weekend. I really enjoyed it. Next, I have Junk Mail, and this is by Kendall Ryan. This was my first ever Kendall Ryan romance, and it is the one that I I recommend the most. This is Josh and Peyton's romance. So Josh is chatting it up with this girl online and she dares him to send her a picture of his manhood. So he does, not knowing that she has given him the wrong number. His picture of his manhood ends up being delivered to Peyton, who is someone he does not know. And they end up spending the night like chatting it up over text message, even though they don't know each other. And then the next day he goes to work and his company helps like startup companies get off their feet. And guess who he is working with now? He will be assisting Peyton with getting her like subscription service off the ground. It was really funny. It was all about like what happens when sexting goes wrong. It's kind of a forbidden thing because now he's technically her boss. I really enjoyed it. If you've been looking to get into Kendall Ryan, I highly recommend this as a good place to start. Or if you're just in the mood for a good office romance, this is a really good one. And the last one is Heidi's Guide to Four-Letter Words by Tara Savek and Andy Arndt. You guys, this one is so good. Heidi, I think she's like initially a preschool teacher, but something happens. She's not teaching. So she takes like a part-time job and she finds herself working at this recording studio, not knowing that this recording studio is actually like a recording studio for audiobooks of like erotica novels. So she's really shy and nervous. She's from Minnesota and you can just tell that she grew up in this really sheltered household. Her parents written heavily in the book and they are so funny. Like this, I think started off just as an Audible original. It might be available as an ebook now, but guys, if you are subscribed to Audible, you have to, like, this is one of those must listen audiobooks. It's hilarious. So she grew up in this really sheltered environment. She's not comfortable with talking about sex. So like working in this erotica studio is crazy for her. So one drunken night, she's drinking some wine and she pulls out some podcasting equipment and she's just like, you know what, we're going to create a podcast called Heidi's Discount Erotica, where each episode she reads a couple of pages or a chapter of an erotica novel. And this is to help build her confidence for the studio that she's now working in, and because she has a really big crush on her neighbor, which she admits in the podcast episode. She's also hoping that that will give her the confidence to like let him know her feelings. It is so good, you guys. Again, it's one of the most, like, if you listen to any audiobook on Audible, like, you have to listen to this one. I absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It's definitely time for a reread because it's been a while. I really loved it. So those are my recommendations for romantic comedies. If you have any recommendations for me, please leave them down in the comments below. I would love to know. And let me know if you plan on joining us this weekend for the Romance Takeover Buddy Read. I would love to know what you plan to read. I will be back very soon with my TBR. As always, thank you so much for watching, guys. Have a great day. Bye.